You're 55 years old, married, and you're looking to retire early. Since you've built up $2 million in your 401k, you're asking yourself the question, is this possible? How can I create a plan to do that? That's what we're going to cover in our video today. Hello, I'm John Vandergriff. I'm one of the owners and the wealth planning team lead here at Blue Ridge Wealth Planners, where we help people answer questions like this every day, trying to make the transition into those retirement years as effectively as possible and planning for the things that really matter. And so as we look at this, obviously we see here a situation of a 55-year-old couple married with $2 million, but we need to really make sure that before we get into the meat of this conversation, we're approaching this the right way, because not everyone in the financial industry does things the same way, unfortunately. And unfortunately, not all people in the financial world are planners by nature. And so we have to approach this the way a planner would have this discussion, which is not focused on the products or investments that you have, but instead starting with the goals at first. Because again, for this particular situation, there are some things that are unique about trying to retire early that are going to be different than the rules apply to somebody maybe 10 years older. So we've got to focus on the goals first and then have the conversation where that is what really maps out and almost works like a foundation for the plan to be built upon. And then that plan is going to tell you what kind of products or investments or even the specific strategies when you start talking about things like tax planning, how those things need to be affected by the way that you position money. All of those things together are really a result of the plan and the goals discussion. So if we don't have these first, really hard to get to this with any kind of accuracy or understanding. And so we've got to make sure that we do this the right way. Now, what we're going to do for today's video is assume that we've already had the first portion of this, because as you watch this, your situation may look a lot different. It may look very similar, but when we sit down with a family at any particular time, that's the thing that we're looking at first. So if you've not had anybody walk you through a discussion like that, we would be happy to. If you will click the link below, we'd be happy to walk through a goals discussion and then obviously see how that translates to our next chart here, which is how we call plan for everything, how we walk people through the 5 areas of planning they need to address. So as we look here, obviously retire at 55. They're wanting to do that to retire early so that they can travel while they still are healthy enough and young enough to enjoy it. But also as a part of that, they find themselves in a unique time where they still have the opportunity to be around their kids without any spouse ties, children of their own ties. But also their parents are still of the certain age where they can spend time and they're not so old that they're not able to do some things that they would like. So travel and enjoying time with their children and their parents is really a unique window that we have here. And so then we've got a position where they want to give back to their local community, which is always a great thing, whether it's volunteering, your time, monetarily donating, all those things are important. And then also, now that they will have a little bit more free time than they did while they were working, want to learn a new hobby. And again, these two don't necessarily affect the finances of the plan, but if we build a good plan, it gives them lots of confidence, then they're able to go and enjoy and do the things that they functionally want and need to do. So as we look at this, what that would require for them, including taxes, is about $100,000 from just a recurring lifestyle need. But then on top of that, $20,000 for travel expense, and this does include the taxes in this, so this is grossed up for taxes. And so as we look at this, they need $120,000 of income today to be able to provide that. And then as we look at this is a little bit unique of a situation, because what we have is a government employee, and what we know about government employees is that they have still the ability to get a pension. This was actually $60,000 a year, not $6,000 a month. So they have the ability to get a pension, but sometimes government employees do not pay into Social Security as a part of the way that their pension is structured. So this particular situation, spouse had a pension, They had that taken care of. The other spouse did not pay into Social Security. They stayed at home. And so it was a situation where they will not have any additional Social Security benefits to contribute. So that makes this a little bit unique. But those of you that may be government employees that have a similar situation, this could be a very relevant video to you. So really, they've got $60,000 of income sources that go into effect now at 55, which help contribute to the ability to retire early. But as we see here, they have just as much of a need from their savings. So they've got basically half of their lifestyle needs taken care of. The other half will need to come from withdrawals from their investments. So as we look at this, their total investment savings is $2.2 million. Of that, as we go up here to the tax conversation, $2 million of it is in their 401k. $200,000 is in their after tax, currently zero money in tax-free positions. But you may be asking yourself the question, well, these people are 55 and they don't necessarily have enough money in these after-tax accounts to be able to get them until a very important age of 59 and a half. So how are they going to be able to functionally retire early? And we have to recognize something that people need to know about if they're considering this, called the rule of 55. And so what this is a rule that is specific in who it applies to, but basically it's a way that you can access 401k money before you're age 59 and a half if you meet the parameters of this. So what you have to do is you have to separate from your employment at the age of 55 or older. But then if you do that, you actually have access to the funds that are inside of your current 401k plan without the 10% government imposed penalty for early withdrawal. So as we look at that, that will be a component of this plan, because some of what we're spending from a income perspective, and it also helps us with our tax conversation as well, is going to be coming from 401k funds that we are going to purposefully keep inside of the 401k plan and the safe allocation, still investing others and maybe investing in them inside of an IRA so that we can roll those into options that have more flexibility. But the mechanism that allows this retirement early to happen with such a large balance in 401ks is this rule of 55. So we have to recognize that is something that is in the favor of this particular situation here, with it being a 55-year-old, with them having strong pension income that allows them to take not so drastic of withdrawals from their 401k. But even if you're in a position where you say, well, John, I don't have a crazy pension, but I do have Social Security coming later, you could still be able to do this if the rule of 55 kicks in. You're just going to have larger principal withdrawals from your assets there, and then those will back off whenever you file for Social Security. So as we look at this, because we look here, and just for round number's sake, we are going to be at about, I'm going to say less than 3%. I did not do the math here, but it's a little more than 3% when we add our 200,000 in for the after-tax portion, but a 3% draw on their 401k. So if we had inflation factored in of 2 to 4%, as we've said before, we like to see this number be at 4% or less, with this number actually being less than 3%. I think that's a good thing for inflation, but we still need to factor in that this particular couple could be retired more longer than they have been working, because we do our plans until 95. So as we look at this, we want to recognize that the growth needed for them may be a little larger because they have such a long time to be retired. And again, they are fortunate that this pension does have a cost of living adjustment associated with it, so it's not totally stuck, and then all of the inflation needs to be factored in on the asset pools. But as we look at this, there will be some responsibility on the 401k to be able to grow, which is going to make it to where this couple, as we have this conversation, one of the things that we need to do is be aware of the risks that we're taking, but also make sure that we understand what that means. With them being a younger couple, they may need to be invested a little bit more aggressively than some people will be on the doorstep of retirement, with a downside risk maximum somewhere around 25 to maybe even 30%. And again, as long as we allocate their funds right, they should be able to handle that based on the way that they interact with their money and where they pull from. So again, we know what we need, we know what we have, we know roughly how risky we would like it to be. Now we come up here to taxes, and as we look at this, this particular situation, they are retiring from an income of $180,000 a year, which would put them into the 22% tax bracket today. And so as we look at this from a tax planning perspective, we notice that 180 will drop to 120 next year. And again, because we're structuring this plan in such a way where we are able to access this rule of 55, one of the things that we may actually benefit from is being able to pull some money from that 401k for the purpose of paying taxes, but maybe waiting until next year where we have a $60,000 drop to our income. Because as we look at this, both the 120 and the 180 are actually in the 22% tax bracket. But again, if we do some things from a tax planning perspective, and again, giving back to the community with charitable deductions, we may actually be able to do some things to get some taxes paid in the 12% next year, lowering that threshold down instead of being stuck in the 22, to see if that makes sense. But again, when we have the conversation of tax planning, it's all about when can we pay the lowest amount of tax. So again, if it makes sense for us to move some now, we'll recognize that, for basically the same income level, their top would go from either 12 to 15 for those first distributions, or 22 to 25. So we've got a higher dollar for dollar tax on this money as we go into the future years than we have right now, which may make sense to do some conversions. It really just depends on how bad taxes get, where if they are staying in $120,000 of income today, that would be a 28% top tax bracket, but several layers here that are higher than a 12 or in the range of a 22 to 24. So as we look at this, we do want to pay attention to tax planning because, as we said, it's not how much you have today, it's how much of it you keep. And as we do the numbers, we recognize that really the thing that we've got to pay attention to here is what is the tax rate that we can pay on that money today versus what it will be later. And whichever of those scenarios have a lower number for you, that's what you need to strategize and take advantage of. Most of the people we're looking at today will benefit from tax environment that we're in now being potentially the lowest environment that they ever see again. So as we look at this, moving and shifting into healthcare, they are currently in a position where they do not have long-term care or home health care coverage, especially as a younger couple. That's not really been anything on their radar. But as we look at this, we've got to pay attention to the amount of liquid after-tax savings. And so as we look at this, they've got $200,000 after tax. We do want to keep after-tax money available, especially in liquid accessible buckets. So as we do this and we do some conversions, benefiting from this rule of 55, we may pay taxes out of those portions, lowering the overall tax threshold, but also making sure that we preserve and increase the amount of liquid after-tax money that this particular couple has, so that if they do get in a bind later, or maybe earlier than they think it would be, they've got some flexibility here when it comes to how they access money, and hopefully with no taxes involved. So as we look here, from a family legacy standpoint, each other as primary beneficiaries is what we see most case for married couple. And then they are in a position where they actually have 3 children. They want those equal from a beneficiary standpoint. Currently, they don't have it set up that way because when the spouse that's working started the 401k, the kids were not of age yet. Not all of them were there, so they just had each other listed on there for a primary. So they need to update beneficiaries on any new documents. They do have estate planning documents done as far as the baseline elements of wills, powers of attorney for finance and healthcare, living wills, but we'll kind of walk through them a little bit more to see if a trust is needed. It depends on really what their desire is for some of this money, but it may not be a necessary function there. And then as we look at it here, they are in a position where of the money that they have coming out for income, they know that about $20,000 a year is what they are wanting to give to either their church or charitable organization. So, as we start to combine, and I mentioned before in our tax planning, there are some ways that we can strategically pull money from these certain types of accounts to try to lower the overall threshold for taxes. And again, benefit from maybe some lower tax environments now, through the way that we strategically give to charitable organizations. So as we look at this, it seems like a lot of stuff going on here. Really what we're looking at is just the inputs here, but then how they are affecting the different areas of income, investments, taxes, healthcare, family legacy. And then as we go through this typically takes up our first meeting. Our second meeting would be analyzing your current situation and seeing how it compares to maybe the income that's needed off of the savings, what kind of risk potential are we taking, identifying the different features of each of these buckets, how they're invested from a tax perspective, trying to make some decisions there. And then as we go through that, if it looks like a change is needed, and again, from a fiduciary perspective, we're going to look at this, and if you're lining up with these numbers, we're going to tell you that it looks very good and you may need to stay the same. But as we do this, if it looks like maybe we're too risky, we're not generating the kind of income that we need, then we're going to start to have a discussion about taxes or about investments that's going to be relevant to the needs that you have from this money. So we have a geographical feature here called a gap that may not be used the same term all around the world, but here we most notably have the Cumberland Gap that we know of. And so as we look at this, we want to make sure there aren't any gaps in our planning strategy, but also in the way that we approach our investments. And so GAP obviously is an acronym here for the things that we primarily need from our money, whether it's growth, access, or protection. It's important to divide up the investment world by what investments do these things the best, and then identifying and almost lining them up so that you can have an expectation that's accurate for what those investments can actually do. So as we look at this, we have to recognize and start with the fact that most people have had a long-term affiliation, a long-term bias toward one of these, which makes evaluating all three of these things hard to do, and we've got to recognize that, and that is growth. Because again, when you think about the first investment account that you ever had, you probably wanted it to have a high growth potential because the first dollars that went in had plenty of time to accumulate, and you had a higher risk tolerance because you had time and you had a paycheck coming in to where you really didn't need this money. But on the doorstep of retirement, you may not have enough time to leave it alone, especially in a downturn. You may not have a high willingness to take risk. This couple is a little different because they do have a long time horizon for retirement. So again, as we get to kind of the way that these are allocated, you're going to see how that interacts. But when we get to retirement, really inflation now becomes the job that growth takes on, because up to this point, your wages were helping you fight against inflation. Now, the growth on your money is going to be the thing that needs to be long-term and hopefully consistently a part of the plan so that you are able to increase some of the distributions or withdrawals that you take and just the overall buying power of your money. So we still need to have money in growth positions. Even in the most conservative cases that we're looking at today, we need to recognize that growth is important, but we also need to recognize that access and protection are just as important when we look at these buckets of money. And so if we're in this position from access, obviously we need to make sure that we have money available for emergencies. If we have large purchases that we're expecting in the future, like paying for a car, a deck, a roof, those things need to come from here so that they don't derail your lifestyle income. But then also, if we have a situation in the future where you or your spouse need some type of custodial care, you want to make sure that you have money allocated in the access bucket for that particular purpose so that you're not trying to get it from super risky areas or trying to get it from things that don't have all the accessibility you would like. So as we look at this, it's important to have this here, but also the protection bucket becomes important because we need to be aware of our overall risk threshold and how we can add things in to balance that. But then also we need to recognize that this is a great place to take our income from, because we know if we invest it in something that is safe, it's not market tracking, we've got the ability to take our income out of an investment pool that doesn't have any loss potential to it, which is a great thing. We don't want our income tied to the stock market because it works when it's good, but it's terrible when it's bad. We would rather sacrifice some growth potential on the buckets that we fund our lifestyle with over the next 10 to 15 years and buy more time for the growth buckets to really make up for the pools that we're taking and possibly then some, and then have money that keeps us, less risky but more accessible in case we have an emergency that goes above the income needs that we have. So you may be asking yourself the question of, well, what do I need to do individually as far as putting my money into growth, access, and protection buckets? And the reality is we're not going to be able to match that up exactly the way that you need to, or even this individual situation needs to, because as we're looking at it, there's a lot of things that need to be encompassed with not just the plan that you create, but also the investments and the way that those are positioned. And so what we would like to do is invite you to click the link below, schedule a time where we can take your situation, plug it into this, and see what kind of output comes from the way that you need planning done, the goals and objectives that you have, and what things need to be changed, if anything, about the investment strategy you're using. Because the reality is, once we have a plan for everything conversation in all 5 of the areas, we're going to test what you're doing now, and then we're going to look and see if any recommendations of changes need to happen. Because as we look at this, you can invest your portfolio several different ways and still get to a very similar end result. It just depends on what you need as an individual and how that needs to be reflected in the way that you create a plan and the way that you position yourself moving forward. And so we'd be happy to sit down with you and see if we can help you in those areas, the way we've helped hundreds of families in this type of planning discussion. And so if you click the link below, schedule a time where we can talk to you. And hopefully you found a lot of value in this video today. Let us know what questions you have, comments below, and obviously subscribe to our channel so that you can get more content like this moving forward. But as far as today goes, that's all we have for you. We look forward to talking to you next time.